All right, so my privilege now is to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Adrian. Are you a doctor? Adrian Tirtanadi. I call everyone doctor, like, that's my thing. Like, my buddies. So, Adrian Tirtanadi. And he runs Open Door Legal in San Francisco. And brilliant. What he's doing, his insight in scriptures, and also his mind into how our legal system works, what's wrong with it, and how easy it is to fix it if we'll all get together and just do it. So, Adrian.
Thank you. Ted has a rare gift of being able to introduce people in a way where you're like, who are they talking about, right? Well, I'm honored and a little intimidated to be here. My name's Adrian. I'm the leader of Open Door Legal. And our mission is to create the country's first system of universal access to legal representation. So I kind of wanted to start by talking about God's heart for justice. If you look at the Bible, it talks about justice a lot. Actually, there's about 2,100 verses on justice and poverty, and about 700 on love, which is not to say that love is not important. It's obviously central. It's to say how important justice is to God. And some verses that kind of give words to God's character around justice include Psalm 146. He upholds the cause of the oppressed and gives food to the hungry. The Lord sets prisoners free. The Lord gives sight to the blind. The Lord lifts up those who are bowed down. The Lord loves the righteous. The Lord watches over the foreigner and sustains the fatherless and the widow, but he frustrates the ways of the wicked. Another psalm, much shorter, 103, the Lord works righteousness and justice for all the oppressed. And here's another one. I know that the Lord secures justice for the poor and upholds the cause of the needy. And as Brett mentioned, when Jesus came, his first proclamation, his mission statement was, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom to the prisoners and recovery of sight to the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And if that isn't about justice, then I don't know what is. And when the minor prophets criticized ancient Israel, they often did it because they felt Israel was not being just to the poor. So in Micah, it says, he has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. Amos said, there are those who turn justice into bitterness and cast righteousness to the ground. There are those who hate the one who upholds justice in court and detest the one who tells the truth. There are those who oppress the innocent and take bribes and deprive the poor of justice in the courts. Hate evil, love good, maintain justice in the courts, and let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. And part of what I'm here to tell you today is, in my opinion, Amos could have been talking about the United States today. So I'll start with a story. One of our clients named Claudia. And Claudia was an immigrant from Guatemala, grew up ever since she was a teenager in San Francisco, married her high school sweetheart, and unfortunately, their relationship quickly turned abusive. He would assault her about twice a week. They had 3 kids. She was even hospitalized at one point because of the abuse, but it never ended because he was able to maintain a system of control. And one day, he actually calls the cops and says, oh, my wife has hit me. And the cops come and they arrest her, and she spends 5 nights in jail. And when she's released, she's given this restraining order that prevents her from going home. She couldn't get a change of clothes. He even locked her out of the bank account, so she couldn't get any money. So she ended up homeless in San Francisco, and she had a trial coming up on whether or not she would be allowed back in her home. And she desperately went around the city and asked for help to 5 agencies, and they all turned her away. They all said, we don't have enough capacity, we're underfunded, it's not the kind of issue we handle. Until finally she found out about Open Door Legal through our kind of street sign, walked in 2 days before her first hearing. We took her case immediately. We had a 3-day trial because her husband was able to afford an attorney. We won the trial. We got her sole custody of the children. We got her back in the home. We got her husband out of the home, and we got her the community assets, even though he tried to hide all the community assets. Thank you. And why was it so hard for Claudia to find help? Well, in the United States, actually in California, it's estimated that there's about 0.79 legal aid attorneys for every 10,000 eligible people, or fewer than 800 attorneys for the entire state, servicing about 4 million potential clients. And this ratio is so bad that according to the World Justice Project, every blue-colored country on this map is rated as having better access to civil justice than the United States. Meaning in countries such as Russia, Brazil, Morocco, Indonesia, it is easier for Claudia to get legal help than in the United States. Which is a shame, right? Because of how effective it is, how effective justice is. So here's one study which found, with the exception of legal services, none of the other services specifically designed to help victims of domestic violence impact the likelihood of abuse. However, women who live in counties with legal assistance programs are significantly less likely to report abuse. And imagine the billions of dollars in lost assets that come because of our failure to ensure justice. It's estimated about $2.8 billion in lost earnings and about $4.1 billion in additional medical debt, specifically for low-income women of color. Let me tell you another story. This one's about another one of our clients, Miss Teresita. She's a widow. She bought a home in San Francisco in the 90s with her husband, who tragically passed 6 months later, unexpectedly. So for 25 years, she spent 60% of her income on this mortgage, raising her daughter in the home, working as a cleaner. And one day, she became so old that it was very difficult for her to clean, and she started falling behind on her mortgage. But she thought it was going to be okay because she had saved up $840,000 in equity in this home. But the bank started foreclosure proceedings, didn't tell her about it. She never got notice about the foreclosure. Didn't find out until her neighbor told her that her home had been sold to an investment group who had then moved to evict her from the property. The bank sent her a check for 1 penny to represent her 25 years of investment in this property. And to top it all off, the bank didn't even have the legal authority to foreclose at the time it did. So she came to us, and we were able to file a wrongful foreclosure lawsuit, get the title back in her name, get all the equity restored, get about $60,000 in damages, which she used to pay off all of her credit debt, and to write an estate plan so she could pass on this $900,000 asset to her daughter. Thank you. And again, what's sad is how common this is. In San Francisco, it's estimated that 84% of all foreclosures are done illegally. And this is common in the US, and virtually none of these individuals will receive legal help. And this alone results in at least $2 billion in stolen assets from the poor every year in California. So a little bit about my story. So here's me and my dad. I've been told I was a very unusual kid. I was very, I guess you could say dorky. I was a very dorky kid. I still am. And so lacking friends, what I did in the 7th grade was essentially read the encyclopedia. And, I sort of found it fascinating. I read and memorized income tables for countries all around the world. And then I went and found my parents' tax returns. And I was able to estimate. I was like, wow, we are very wealthy compared to the rest of the world. So I brought this information to my parents, and I said, why are we so wealthy, and why aren't we giving more to the poor? And, they really didn't like this question because they felt like they were very middle class. And I said, no, the data shows otherwise, Mom and Dad. And it became like this long fight. And essentially, I became radicalized by the book of James. So here's one of my favorite passages. Now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that is coming on you. Your wealth has rotted, and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. The corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. And I said, Mom, Dad, what's going on? So, to get back at them, I said, I am going to refuse to make Christmas lists from now on because I have everything I need or could ever want. And they're like, you have to make a Christmas list. And I said, what are you talking about? So then I gave away one year. I wrote the presents they gave me, and they got really mad at me. It just kind of went like that. Eventually, I went to college, where I decided to study systemic poverty and political economy. I met my wife at college, Jess. On our first date, what I said was, before I basically said anything else, I said, Jessica, all I care about is social change. I don't care about money. So if you want a nice house or a nice car, you should just date someone else, because I'm completely not interested. And those were the magic words. So we got married, and I worked in community development for a few years, and I felt this real calling and vision from God to go into legal aid. And I essentially had this thesis that legal services was this dramatic way of reducing poverty in America. So I wrote up a business plan on how to do it, and we drove across the country to San Francisco. I went to law school, spent all of law school working to start the nonprofit, and opened 2 weeks after I got my license. Thanks. So this is me and my co-founder and one of our first employees in front of where we started. We started in the back of a Salvation Army. We put a kind of sign right on the street, get legal help. And with just that sign, immediately we were overwhelmed with requests for help. People with good cases who had been turned away, like Claudia, at 5 or more places. And I remember thinking just how sort of outrageous it was, right? In San Francisco, which I think has 20,000 lawyers in it, right? How I ended up being this kind of last hope for people. So many people coming in every day looking for help. It was very overwhelming. I would say it's kind of like opening the first well in the desert, you know? And it was very, very stressful. So, I think for the first 5 years, we never had more than 2 weeks of cash at any one time. So every week, I would sit down and pray for funding to pay the staff in 2 weeks, right? And there was about a 2-year period where I didn't sleep through the night once. I would wake up covered in sweat from night terrors like 5 times a night, every night. And I had to keep a towel next to the bed. But praise God, the model was successful. We were able to grow. So let me describe the model real quick. It's like a general hospital, but for legal issues. So rather than forcing people to kind of self-diagnose what exactly their legal problem is, we say, if you feel like you've been treated unfairly, come down and we will kind of do an assessment, right, based on what the law is. We handle cases in over 35 areas of law for people less than 50% area median income. Here are some of them. And we've even kind of built a technology platform that allows us to build a system of coordinated entry with all the other legal service providers in the city. So the final system kind of looks like this, with Open Door Legal kind of providing this layer of general practice, the other nonprofits being this kind of specialty providers, and the city attorney kind of doing the impact cases on top of that, all tied together with this technology platform. And just like how other universal public services, like public schools, were built one school at a time, one county at a time, we have built this model one zip code at a time. Starting in the southeast corner of the city in Bayview Hunters Point, we then moved to the lighter blue, or sort of slightly darker blue shades, the Excelsior, the Western Addition, the Marina, and just this month began taking cases on the west side of the city. So now we've finished expanding to about 2/3 of San Francisco, with the goal over the next 2 years of finishing expanding citywide. Thanks. So here's what that sort of growth looks like in terms of budget. Our first year we had a budget of about $35,000, which was enough to pay me and my co-founder minimum wage. My wife and I, actually for 4 years, we shared a twin bed in a roughly 110 square foot apartment. So I feel like I kept my promise to her in college. Praise God, we're up to a $5.6 million budget this year with about 47 full-time staff and opening our 4th office. And I'd love to again take credit, and I do think I work hard, but really, I cannot take credit because this is the Lord's work. So I see this as a good sort of praxis of faith in action, and I'll just share one more client story, and that's for Michelle. And so Michelle grew up in San Francisco, lived her whole life in Bayview, Hunters Point, and was living in public housing in the city. And she had multiple problems with her unit. First, there was no heating, hadn't been heating for about 2 years. Second, she had black mold that was growing in about 2/3 of the apartment, and the housing authority refused to remediate it. But the big issue actually was the sewage. So raw sewage would sort of fill her tub, also fill her bathroom. She was forced to relieve herself in a bucket and had to bathe in the shower. She also had 2 grandchildren with her at the time. And the housing authority, again, just refused to fix it. Actually, they said that she owed them rent and they were going to evict her. So, and she works in construction. So, she likewise went to 4 places, tried to get help, was turned away before she found us. And we brought actually a very simple action. And within 2 weeks, got the sewage, the heating, and the mold fixed, and the back rent canceled on her behalf. And what I want to say about her is she's the most godly woman I've ever met. She is so godly that she plays gospel 24/7. Even when she's not at home, she's got gospel music playing. I visited her at her home, and I was like, "You just have gospel music playing all the time?" She's like, "Of course, Adrian. We have to keep the demons and spirits out of this home." So I don't feel like I need to share the word with her. I think my role is to help show God's love for her and everyone else. So over the last 10 years, this is kind of a map of our impact in Bayview. Every dot is a family that we've represented. And this shows like how common these kinds of legal issues are in our community with our neighbors. So here's our vision, 6 centers across San Francisco. And once we do that, hopefully we'll be able to replicate this model into counties and cities across the country and eventually change how we think about poverty and how we deliver justice to our neighbors. So I want to close by talking about the nature of sin. My favorite topic. So sin is nothing more than the tragic flaw on our hearts that causes us to harm ourselves and to harm others. In fact, the word most often translated as sin is hamartia, which strictly, literally means tragic flaw. And when I think about the tragic flaw in America, I think of injustice. But, because I think about, what is wrong with our hearts that we, as a society, are the only developed country in the world that doesn't already guarantee help to people like Claudia and Michelle and Teresita. But I want to say that there is good news. Because of Jesus, we are freed from sin. We are freed from the anchor on our hearts, and we are freed to love our neighbors as ourselves. And, paraphrasing Paul, we have now become slaves to righteousness, which can also be translated as slaves to justice. So I will close in prayer, and that is that we would have the courage to learn to do right, to seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, and plead the case of the widow. Amen.